Hello, welcome to my drawing of the secret door. I'm Macbigicekeys, and this is my art vlog. If you happen to be new to my channel, I've been doing this forever. I do a lot of gaming stuff, art stuff, music stuff, whatever I'm into, please feel free to check it out. If you're an artist, an amateur like me, or a professional, and you have any advice, please offer it. I don't have a personal art community, so I kind of reach out through YouTube and Twitter and socials in order to get feedback and get inspired. So I really appreciate that. In my last vlog video, there was a lot of hands. I was drawing, I draw Hulk's hands in a comic style. I drew a human's hands holding a sword with a reference style. And so in this current drawing, I did everything I possibly could to avoid drawing hands. In the last video, or the last drawing that I did, I was drawing with an Intuos Wacom tablet on Krita on my computer, and I just wasn't satisfied with how it felt. So I really tried to force myself to not use that whatsoever for this drawing. I did the original drawing in pencil, as you can see, kind of sitting on my couch watching TV with the wife. And then I decided to do everything else in Procreate, which I'm not very comfortable with. So here I'm penciling over the paladin character, which is on the left side, and you see these poses. I actually took a picture, referred myself, and so I know the proportions are accurate. One thing I did augment was the helmet. I made the helmet bigger because I figured it had to be bigger than the head, and in the original, if you looked at the underdrawing before, you could see that the head was just kind of barely showing. So that gives this paladin, which is supposed to be human size, kind of like dwarf size stature. Right here I'm ghosting in the left hand, and I got inspired by some inking from, I think it's Luke Ink. Check out the YouTube channel and his Twitter and all that. What he likes to do is to simplify the shapes that kind of go in the background or in the back of whatever ground you're in. So this character's in the foreground, but that left arm is kind of not the focal area. So he just kind of cross hatches it out. I was trying that out. Eventually, if you look at the finished drawing at the beginning or the end of the video, you see that I decided to go a different route with that, but I was experimenting. And then so this bottom portion of the outfit was supposed to be chainmail, and I am totally stuck on chainmail. So if anyone has a good strategy, please let me know. You can see I'm just going through every which possible way. I've seen some people recently draw them kind of oversized and really big, so it gives the impression of chainmail, but then when you look at it all clumped together, if it's in the foreground like it is here, it just doesn't look good. The strategy that I ended with is to start with a black background and then use the eraser tool to draw overlaying circles and half cylinders or half circles, and then kind of fade it out a little bit, which doesn't work great if you're doing black and white, strictly black and white, like this drawing's gonna eventually be. So I think for a painterly style that would work really well. You could mist over it, but with this black and white style, again, aside from drawing every tightly bound piece of chainmail, I don't think anything's really gonna work well for me. So I covered it with black, because when in doubt, just cover everything in black. So he went from having a chainmail kind of over skirt sort of thing, because in medieval times they would have these long chainmail shirts and then like these long undershirts underneath those. And so that's kind of the style I went with some leather plates right here. Mainly I was trying to finish up the details on the paladin because in the original pencil drawing, I didn't detail this character at all. I just kind of sketched in a rough from my reference, and then I've spent all my time the previous night working on the warlock character on the right side, who's peering into the darkness of the secret door. So I guess one of my faults here is I should have spent more time on the underdrawing before trying to jump into the next phase. And that's typically an issue that I run into, where I'm so anxious to jump into the next stage. It's mostly because I'm impatient when it comes to drawing, whenever I'm not actually doing the drawing. So I don't mind doodling and going about and getting lost in the creating aspect, but in the back of my mind, sometimes if I stop and look, I'm like, well, I should be inking at this point, or I should be coloring at this point. And that's a really bad mindset to get in. You know, again, as an amateur artist, I have no delusions of grandeur here. Okay, so let's talk about the sword. The sword is out of perspective because the shoulders of the character are in about, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet from the character in the front. You can see on the right side the character's head that's in the foreground. He's ahead of the paladin character on the left, which is in the background. And the paladin is pulling the door to the left, but he's heaving his shoulders kind of forward and to the right. And that's why the head should be smaller in this case, or the helmet should be a little smaller in this case. But it's just a weird perspective. So I really value challenging myself because this was very challenging for me. But at the same time, it's so frustrating. It's like, how much time do I spend on redrawing this sword that's going to not get me to the point where I can finish the drawing and then move on to the next drawing? This medieval chest armor was also giving me trouble, perspective trouble, because my reference image looked kind of how I have the armor now, but I know that the armor would be kind of sticking up and out, foreshortening toward the camera, because the medieval armor is basically like a metal trash can that's just cut along the sides in half. So the cylinder doesn't make sense to me, and that was another frustrating part of this character in particular. I don't like drawing armor, and it's frustrating for me. It's probably because I'm not so great at it. So I need to practice armor. Mental note. Practice armor. The armor goes through a whole nother iteration when I get to the inking stage for this character. Because remember, I'm still kind of penciling this guy in at this point. So here I go to tackle the sword. I'm trying to figure out the perspective, how that works. That's always confusing to my brain, how a point comes forward to you because it's pointed, you know? So I kind of did a 2D rectangle and kind of took my lines from there. I think it worked out okay. And then again later, I'm going to go in and deal with the handle of the sword, and I didn't have a sword on my reference image, so a lot of issues over here with perspective. Whilst trying to fix the perspective mistake on the sword, I'm currently making another mistake, but I'm not aware of it just yet. You'll notice that the pommel of the sword, the square at the very end of the top, is larger than the grip where it meets the crossguard, a little crossguard that comes before the blade. And that should be the reverse, since the sword is kind of sticking out and toward the camera. So I will go back and fix that later. But again, just all these little trappings that you run into where you're rushing and not taking your time. And before I continue, if you're enjoying this video, we're 8 minutes in. If you could give me a comment, a like, a subscribe, share with someone, other art people that might give me advice or help me out, I'd love that. So another issue here with the door, I was still figuring out the composition as a whole, and I felt like the door being kind of cut off at the top of the canvas made it seem like all the characters were short instead of the characters kind of hunching and leaning over. So I decided to double the height of the canvas in order to allow for some of that height in the composition. I kind of rough in all the blocks here just to kind of get a feel for how it would look. And in the ending image, I decide to get rid of a lot of that and leave most of it kind of empty space. And I really like the effect that I ended with. So I'm gonna cut this back down just to the top of the door, since most of this is gonna go away anyways. There we go. So I roughly thought about how the door was going to function, and because it was a secret door in the D&D scenario that I was playing through, I had to figure out, well, how was it secret? So I had this idea that the door itself would have these faux kind of stone bricks on it that would overlap the opening of the door and fit into grooves on the stone tiles on the right side of the door. So a lot of machinations in my brain trying to figure that all out. And then I had to deal with the perspective of the door, which unfortunately was not in my reference. So I kind of had to make that up. And either Procreate doesn't have perspective tools or rulers, or I just don't know how to use them. So I was really figuring out all this perspective kind of freehand on the fly. And I think I'm going to get to the skulls here in just a second, and I'm going to zoom in for the skulls. This is approximating the size at which I was actually drawing these skulls. I kind of like this brush. I think this was and I go through a bunch of lots of brunch, brush types in the drawing, but I think this was called dry brush. And I liked the kind of grainy feel that it left. But then like later on, I felt like I wanted a more slick inking brush. So I don't know, the default brushes in Procreate all don't really make me happy. I don't know what to do with that. I guess I kind of just need to choose one or two and just go with it, and that's what I ended up doing. My proportions on these skulls are not the skulls faces themselves, but on the skulls in comparison to the other skulls is a little off. So later on, I'll resize that one at the bottom center, and I'm going to throw that up in the foreground to kind of emphasize the left foot of the pencil drawing of the warlock on the right. And hopefully that'll emphasize that the warlock is a little bit closer to the camera than the paladin on the left. And I tried to use the skulls here to kind of weave your eye from the center to the right and then back into the dark door. And there it is, it just pops in right there. So that catches your eye, and then the other skulls will naturally kind of draw you into the door. And that's the whole action of this scene, is what's in the darkness behind this secret door. That's the focal point, is basically dark nothingness, which is opposite of what a focal point should be. But I guess it makes sense in this context. I did most of this work pretty much until this point on the Procreate side, just standing up at one of my desks, and I remember looking at a 3D virtual skull. You can kind of move around to kind of get the references for the skull, so it was great practice. One of the hard lessons that I've learned in my art journey, if you will, is to use references. You hear professionals say it all the time in their videos, and you don't want to trust that idea that like, no, I should be able to just draw it all from my head. But you don't have the vocabulary of the entire world, all objects and all things that exist in your head in a three-dimensional space, and you're not expected to. So, and that's okay. It's more fun to sit there drawing even from a reference and getting lost in the process than it is to be so frustrated that you can't get a perspective right or you can't get a skull to look proper. Now I'm flipped over to the warlock on the right, and this is my D&D character. His name's Sotwell, and he's awesome. And I could say, like, right from this point forward with this character, because I drew it out to the point that I wanted to draw it out, I'm really kind of inking. So I'm just getting it on its separate layer. I'm getting rid of any of the old messy pencil stuff that's left over in the background and all that. And this was after lunch. I took a break. So again, I'm kind of going through right now, and you can see some of those scratches on the top right. I'm trying to figure out what brush I want to use, because I really wasn't happy with the inky dry brush. So I think I go to the technical pen, and then I think a lot of it was with the technical pen, and I'm not sure what the other one was. But it was one of the main free ones in Procreate. I still haven't downloaded any brush sets to Procreate. I don't know if I want to. Oh, I'm kind of writing some of them up there. I've been a fan of some of the inking styles where they do a lot of that texturing with these little straight lines that you see above his back right there. And so I was trying to capture that in some of this image, similar to what I was talking about with the paladin's hand, the left arm, but also for textures. But I found later on that the danger of that, as I texture the crap out of this stonework, I'll delete that in a second, I found one of the trappings of that is to over texturize everything, and then everything just feels overwhelming. And I think the same thing is true for the background here. Had I left all that stonework in the final image, it wouldn't read the same. It takes away from the focal point. And the point here isn't to draw realistically. I don't like drawing 100% realistically. The point is the story of the drawing. If you happen to watch my previous video, I did talk about how I over-render things with my scribbles before I get to drawing. So I hope you can appreciate, I'm appreciating at least, how my underdrawing isn't all scribbled. It's very kind of not precise, but intentional lines, because my whole focus was line work here. So I think that was a success, at least on this character that I finished in pencil first. Lots of erasing, but I was doing intentional lines. This character wears an eye patch over his left eye, and none of this was in my reference. This was a reference of me kind of standing in a t-shirt and shorts. So I had to kind of improvise the ropes, and I don't have long hair, and the chest and the arm and all that sort of stuff. I think it looks simple. I don't think it looks overly emphasized muscles and all that. So it's kind of realistic. Here I'm redrawing the eye patch because I couldn't figure out how the eye patch would sit on the eyes. But I do wear glasses. So kind of an odd angle of the face too that was giving me a challenge right here. And I think I overcame the challenge because I didn't try to draw the nose because the nose wasn't visible. And I didn't try to draw the eye or the eyelashes because that wasn't visible in the reference. The lips weren't visible. So even though it doesn't read exactly the way I want it to read in the final image, I think it is accurate. Here I am doing the cape. I've gotten so much better with doing folds of capes and understanding how fabric kind of swirls around itself. It's not perfect, but I'm getting better. This is all just kind of from my imagination. Right here I'm drawing a boot, but if you look at the other foot, you'll see that his pants go over his boots. So I don't know what I was thinking, but I was kind of zen drawing and I was just kind of into it, and that's totally fine. Had to use a reference again for these pants because what do medieval pants look like? They don't look like anything that I could even imagine, right? They were completely different. So I found a Pinterest reference for that. And then I kind of did a bell-bottom open cuff at the bottom just because I thought this guy has this gaudy orange cape that he got, but it's a protection plus one cape, so he wears it. And I thought, well, why not some bell bottoms added into those leather pants? Sorry if my voice is going. One of the reasons I do these videos is being a survivor of throat cancer. Sometimes I have to retrain my voice, and so I'm forcing myself to do that over the next few weeks here. And you probably hear a cough drop clacking or my voice going away. But darn it, I'm going to make it for at least a couple more minutes here. So the Warlock has been inked just the first pass. There's no detail on it. That's just the kind of outlining and main lines. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the skulls. And this is one of my favorite parts of just, you don't have to think anymore. You're just going over the lines, messing around with the line weight. I was kind of listening to some videos of other people drawing as I was doing this, again, because I don't have anyone I can just sit and draw with, so I kind of use that YouTube thing as a placeholder. When I was originally drawing these, I changed some of the skulls. Like the one I'm doing right now is I kind of changed the eyes on it. There's one in the back that has some horns. I think I threw a goblin skull in there. So most of them are supposed to be human, but there's some monster skulls in the secret room just as well. You'll notice I did with the Warlock character on the right, underneath the cape and underneath his left arm, you can see that I did doing those solid blacks. And I'm kind of doing the same thing on the eye sockets with the skulls. And that's my first step into rendering with this piece. I'm going to do the door, and then this pass over the paladin, again, is much faster because I'm not having to design as I go. So I think one of my goals in my next drawing or for the next week or so is whenever I draw to try to fully realize through multiple sketches what it is I want to draw in the end before I sit down and want to be in inking mode. I heard someone say it recently, the thing has to exist fully in your head before you can put it on the paper. Whether like it's the leather pants I was talking about before, or it's a belt buckle or a piece of rope, you need to know how it looks, you know. How does that piece of armor turn? How does that thread go through? How does that ring hang? And then the drawing becomes a lot easier. The other thing is I'll be 46 here pretty soon. And the more that I do this and the more that I draw, I'm realizing and I have been drawing my whole life. I'm kind of learning this in the last quarter of my life here, is that for a finished drawing, if it's not just a sketch, you're going to redraw it no matter what. Like this armor that I'm doing right now, I've changed it twice already, and here I'm doing a full different change of how the armor looks. I'm simplifying it, and I think the simplification looks better than what occurred the first time. So you're going to redraw it anyways. Why not redraw it multiple times when you're sketching in the initial stage where everything's messy, you're sketching and erasing, rather than trying to redraw later, because you're going to run into redraw issues later anyways. As if on cue, this door, okay? I mentioned it earlier in the video, but even after I did the background and I finished the line work, there were still a few issues. I noticed the helmet on the Paladin was too big for perspective, and I had to change that when I was in the coloring phase. And then the door, some of these tiles were off, and so I had to adjust the tiles to match where they go into the walls on the opposing side. And if you look right where the bottom of the door meets the wall, the line on the left side is wrong, because you can see with the construction line that I have here, it actually would be up a little bit higher. So there's a lot of confusion there with what is prospectively correct. And so I had to actually fix that. I didn't catch that mistake until I was in the coloring phase of this drawing. I thought I was done with the line work. So again, you're just always redrawing and refining. But at the same time, you always got to find the spot where it's okay to stop and say, I've experienced this drawing enough, I've learned enough from the practice, and I'm happy with how the story is being told, and I'm ready to start thinking about the next thing. I'm starting to crawl up the open door on the edges here, doing those fine little hash mark details. And I think I had also kind of switched to a different pen after eating some lunch, and it came back. I started with the cracks kind of overdoing it, and I realized it just didn't need that much. The concrete between the stones is really not my focal area, so I could leave that alone a little bit. I did like the white open space on the part of the door that's closest to the blackness of the interior door. And I'm doing the skulls. The skulls were a lot of fun. This is really just kind of shading, doing the angles on the different skulls, different ways, just to emphasize the different skulls. The cape, I wasn't really super confident with these long flowy lines in the cape, but I was kind of emulating some of the styles I've been watching and looking at lately, so I was trying that out. I don't know, what do you think about the cape? I don't know whether I like those long lines or whether I should have just left it with the solid blacks and whites. That's always been my thing, is black and whites for the last few years. Then kind of muting this chainmail, fixing the perspective on that armor to maybe show a little bit more of the lower back. I really think had I not gone with like the long sort of dress bottom on the Paladin, had I done like leg armor, so you could see that left leg shooting forward and the knee dropping down in the background, it probably would have read better. I'm also playing around with the Warlock's hair a little bit to show some kind of in the light. I like the effect, but I think it takes away from the focal area, so I decide against it. Here comes that change on the left arm, and it's going to go from the hash marks, kind of cross-hatching, to solid black, and I think that makes a big change in the effect of the drawing. The helmet on that Paladin's still way too big, but I don't catch that until later, and some of these door tiles are off, and I'm going to have to redraw those when I'm in the coloring stage. Well, here I do one right there. So that fixes one of the issues that was there. And that's the end of the drawing. So if you like this sort of thing, please let me know in comments or like it and share it. And I did record my flat coloring of this drawing, and I might post that as well. Until then, comment if you like if you do. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.